A few months ago, I told some stories in my homilies about my mother-in-law, and today's readings actually made me think of my father-in-law. And they also bring us back to a theme I spoke of a few months ago, that theme of the horizontal and the vertical dimensions of our nature. And my father-in-law passed away a little over 15 years ago now. And what was really interesting was that after his passing, when people spoke of him, they didn't speak about kind of his horizontal place in the world, his career and his accomplishments, and kind of those objective and biographical details. Rather, they spoke about things like his presence, like his wisdom, but primarily his presence. And he had been sick for a couple of years. He had cancer, and he'd been doing pretty well. But then one morning, late summer, he was working in his garden, came in for lunch, felt a little bit of pain in his stomach, the pain in his abdomen area. Pain got worse, and he went into the hospital. And 2 days later, he passed away. And a couple of weeks after his passing, my mother-in-law received a letter from a nurse at the hospital. And the nurse said, in those 2 days, he taught her how to die. And I think he had accomplished what Jesus speaks of in today's gospel reading. Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. And he was one of the bridesmaids whose flask was full of oil. And that didn't happen by accident. It happened because he was a man of prayer. And his prayer included not only what we might think of when we conventionally think of prayer, reading the scriptures, praying the rosary, and all those practices and traditions, but he especially followed Jesus' instruction in Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. Whenever you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And so, twice a day, 6:30 in the morning when he got up, and usually just before supper, he went into his little office room, closed the door, and prayed. And I don't know all the specifics of his prayer life, but I know enough to say with absolute confidence that at the core of his prayer life was silence. And it was that daily practice of silence that filled his flask with oil. And last Saturday, the deacons from across the diocese, we gathered with the bishop, and the bishop spoke to us. And one of the comments the bishop made was, he actually was quoting Pope Benedict, and he said that the words of Jesus come from the deep silence of the Father. The words of Jesus come from the deep silence of the Father. And this week I spent a little bit of time finding some other things that Pope Benedict had to say about silence. And this is one of the quotes I found from one of his general audiences in 2012. And Pope Benedict said, "Silence has the capacity to open a space in our inner being, a space in which God can dwell, which can ensure that his word remains within us and that love for him is rooted in our minds and hearts and animates our lives. Silence has the capacity to open a space in our inner being, a space in which God can dwell." In other words, silence can develop that vertical dimension of our natures. And the practice of silence is something that the church has long held and long taught. You know, the Catechism, in the section of the Catechism on prayer, and I invite you to go and read this, it says, the Christian tradition comprises three major expressions of the life of prayer: vocal prayer, meditation, and contemplative prayer. And generally speaking, you know, vocal prayer is something we practice and know something about. But meditation and contemplative prayer, probably not so much. And at this time in our history, our collective history, at this time of turmoil, uncertainty, threats of all different kinds, all different forms of unrest, I believe that we're being called as Christians in a very particular and specific way to fill our flasks with oil, to develop that vertical dimension within us, not only for ourselves, but as a gift to the world. Because we live in a very, very noisy world with a lot of voices calling for our attention and a lot of clutter and a lot of spin and nothing, most of it really just very superficial buzz and whirl. And the world desperately needs people of depth and substance, people of presence, people of wisdom, like my father-in-law. And that wisdom does not come from cleverness or from being intelligent. Like the Pope said of Jesus, it comes from being rooted in the deep silence of the Father. And so I'll have more to say about that in some upcoming homilies. But for today, I'd like to close with a verse from today's psalm that I think captures the essence and spirit of what I've been attempting to communicate with you this morning. I think of you on my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night, for you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy.